Story 1. The Man by the Fire. Before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand something about the neighborhood I grew up in. Salem, Oregon is not the kind of place you'd expect to be the setting for something like this. It's quiet. It's tree-lined. It's the kind of place where kids ride their bikes until the streetlights come on, and parents don't think twice about letting them play in the backyard alone. It was, and still is, for the most part, one of those towns that feels like it exists slightly outside of the real world. Like a snow globe, peaceful, contained, safe. I grew up as the middle child of 3 boys. My older brother was named Scott, and my younger brother was about 4 years old at the time this happened. I was somewhere around 7 or 8. Scott was deep into the Boy Scouts. He would eventually earn Eagle Scout, which was a huge deal in our family, and my little brother would eventually join the Scouts too, though he'd quit somewhere in the middle of his Boy Scout years. For whatever reason, my parents never pushed me into scouting. I don't know why. Maybe they figured I wasn't interested. Maybe the timing never worked out. But I never got the uniform, never went to the meetings, never got the handbook. And man, did I resent that as a kid. Not in a deep or traumatic way, just that gnawing, low-grade jealousy that only kids can really feel about something. I would go with my mom to watch Scott's Pinewood Derby races, and I'd stand there in the gymnasium with all the other parents and siblings, watching these little handmade cars race down wooden tracks. And I just wanted to be a part of it. I wanted the badges. I wanted the handbook. I wanted the campfire. The campouts, most of all. Whenever Scott's troop was getting ready for a weekend camping trip, there was this whole ritual of preparation that would take over our house for the days leading up to it. He'd bring home a tent, one of the troop tents, and set it up in the backyard to practice. He'd pack and repack his gear. He'd check the weather. There was something thrilling about watching all that preparation from the outside. It looked like an adventure. It looked like something important, and I was on the outside of it, peering in. So one afternoon, watching Scott wrestle with the tent poles in our backyard, I had what felt like the most brilliant idea of my young life. Why not just do it ourselves? We had the tent. We had the backyard. Our backyard was, by most definitions, pretty incredible for what I had in mind. Our neighborhood in Salem was one of those old, spacious developments where the yards just kind of blended into each other. No fences separating one property from the next, just long stretches of grass that gave way to clusters of old-growth trees and thick brush. It felt like the edges of the neighborhood just dissolved into the wilderness. Our backyard, specifically, was enormous, and we had a fire pit. A real one, not one of those portable metal rings, an actual dugout fire pit that my dad had built years ago, ringed with stones. When I brought the idea to my parents, they didn't just agree, they leaned into it. My dad hauled out firewood and got the pit going. My mom brought out marshmallows and skewers. My little brother, who was only 4, sat with us and roasted marshmallows until the sugar was dripping off his fingers. It was perfect. It felt like the real thing. It felt exactly like what I imagined a scout campout to be. When it started getting late, my parents brought my little brother inside. He was too young to sleep in the tent, and 4-year-olds don't exactly have the temperament for sleeping on the ground. After a little while, with the fire dying down to embers and the stars visible through the gaps in the trees overhead, Scott and I crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and settled into our sleeping bags. I remember that the Game Boy SP was the handheld console at the time. This clamshell design with a backlit screen that felt like pure luxury compared to what came before it. Scott and I both had one. We lay there in the tent, side by side in our sleeping bags, each of us lit up by the glow of our screens. I was playing Super Mario Bros. 2. I was obsessed with that game. I could never beat it. Something about it always tripped me up, but I kept coming back to it. The Birdo boss fights. The whole dream logic of the game. I loved it. Eventually, though, my eyes started getting heavy. I put the Game Boy away and turned onto my side, facing the wall of the tent. I expected sleep to come quickly. I was tired. I was outside. I was comfortable in that way you can only be comfortable when you're a kid on an adventure. But sleep didn't come. I lay there for a long time. Really a long time. Much longer than I expected, staring at the faint play of shadows on the tent wall. A sleeping bag, I discovered that night, is not actually that comfortable when you're not used to it. The ground was harder than I expected. Every time I shifted, the nylon rustled. The sounds of the backyard felt different at night, too. Not scary exactly, just present. The occasional rustle of wind through the tree line, a dog barking far away, the distant sound of a car on the road out front. Eventually, I don't know how long it took, I drifted off. And then I woke up. I don't know what woke me. There was no specific sound that I can remember. No noise that pulled me out of sleep. I just opened my eyes, and I was awake, lying in the dark tent with no sense of how much time had passed. I blinked a few times. I looked around, and I noticed the other sleeping bag was empty. Scott was gone. I sat up. His sleeping bag was lying flat and unoccupied beside me, the top folded back like he'd carefully climbed out of it. The tent zipper was fully closed. He must have gotten up, gone inside. Maybe he couldn't sleep either, or had to use the bathroom, or just decided he was done with the outdoors for the night. I was suddenly, acutely alone. Now, this was our backyard. I had been in that backyard hundreds of times. I knew every square foot of it. In the daytime, it was just grass and trees and a fire pit and a fence line. But in the dark, alone in a tent at age 7 or 8, knowing that Scott was gone, it felt different. It felt very different. I sat there for a moment, debating. I needed to go inside. I didn't want to be in the tent alone. But between me and the back door was a stretch of dark backyard, and my kid brain was doing what kid brains do at 2 in the morning, filling in every shadow, every corner with possibilities. I crawled up to the tent zipper and hesitated. I decided to unzip it just enough to look outside first. Just a quick peek. Just to make sure everything was clear. Just to look at the yard before I ran through it. So I pulled the zipper down a few inches, creating a small gap, and pressed my face to the opening. The backyard was dark. The fire in the pit had died all the way down to cold ash, or close to it. There was no glow from the embers anymore. The back porch light was off. The trees at the far edge of the yard were just a black mass against a slightly lighter sky, and the chairs near the fire pit, the lawn chairs my parents had dragged out earlier. One of them was occupied. There was a man sitting in one of the chairs. I don't know how to fully explain what happened in my body in that moment. It wasn't quite fear yet, not in the screaming, running sense. It was more like my entire system just stopped, like a circuit breaker had tripped. I registered what I was seeing, and the information just sat there for a second, too large to process. He was facing the tent. He was a grown man, not a kid, not a teenager, a grown man, sitting in the chair by the fire pit, facing directly toward the tent, sitting completely still. And the moment I processed that, the moment I understood that this was a stranger, a man who should not have been there, sitting and watching the tent in the darkness, I gasped and yanked my face back from the opening and zipped it shut as fast as my hands would move. I scrambled back into my sleeping bag. I pulled it up around me. I know, on some rational level, that a sleeping bag is not protection from anything. It's cloth and insulation. It does nothing, but I pulled it up anyway, because every instinct I had was screaming at me to make myself small, to hide, to disappear. The tent was almost completely dark, just the faintest gray light filtering through the fabric. Moonlight, I think, or maybe distant streetlight. I lay there absolutely rigid, holding my breath. I wanted to call for my dad. I wanted to scream at Dad. Just the word. Just the hope that it was somehow my dad who had come outside to check on us and sat down by the fire pit and was just sitting there quietly. But I knew it wasn't my dad. I had gotten a look at him, brief as it was. My dad would have said something when he saw me peek out of the tent. My dad would have called over to me. This man had said nothing. This man had just sat there. It wasn't my dad. I heard the lawn chair shift, the slight creak of weight redistributing on plastic and aluminum. He was moving. I held perfectly still. I think I had stopped breathing entirely. I was praying. I went to Catholic school, so praying felt like the logical response. I was praying that if I didn't move, if I made no sound, he would think the tent was empty, that he would think Scott and I had gone inside hours ago, and the tent was just sitting there, unoccupied. Then I saw the shadow on the tent wall, the side facing the fire pit. I saw a shadow fall across the fabric. Someone was standing right outside the tent, standing close enough to block the ambient light. I thought, maybe if I closed my eyes, it would stop being real. I was 8 years old. I still believed things like that were possible. Then I heard the zipper, very slow, not ripping it open, not yanking it, slow and deliberate, almost careful, the way you'd move if you were trying not to wake someone up. The zipper tab dragged downward 1 inch, 2 inches, maybe 3. Not all the way open, just a small gap at the top of the tent door. I did not move. I stared at the tent ceiling, every muscle in my body locked. And then I remembered something I had never noticed or thought about before that moment. In all the times I'd been around tents, there's a gap at the bottom of most tent zippers. A small space where the zipper track ends and the fabric doesn't quite meet. A gap you'd never notice during the day. Because it doesn't matter during the day. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough. There was an eye pressed against that gap. One eye, just one, looking straight through the small space at the bottom of the zipper, looking directly at me. I could see the white of it, the gleam of it in the darkness. It was close, closer than anything should have been. Just one eye, framed by the narrow gap in the tent fabric, staring at me without blinking. I couldn't scream. I want to explain that. The way fear can be so total, so complete, that it bypasses all the normal physical responses. I had no voice. I had no movement. I was just frozen, staring back at that eye, and the eye was staring at me. Then it moved. The eye squinted slightly. The way someone's eyes move, when they smile. I couldn't see the smile. Just that eye, crinkling at the corner, in the dark. The zipper moved another inch, and then I screamed. I'm told it was loud enough to wake the neighbors, though I have no memory of how loud it was. I just know that I suddenly had my voice back, fully and completely, and I was using all of it. I was thrashing backward in my sleeping bag, kicking and scrambling, knocking into the tent poles, knocking into the sides, completely panicked and trying to get as far from that zipper as the tent walls would allow. I heard footsteps outside, running footsteps, fast, heading away through the yard toward the tree line, and then our back porch light blazed on. The door burst open. My dad came out fast, shouting, not words at first, just sound, the sound of a man who had just been woken by his child screaming. He ran across the backyard. I could track his progress by sound, by the thud of his feet on the grass. He reached the fire pit area, reached the tree line, circled the yard. Whoever it was already gone. My parents called the police. Officers came, searched the immediate area, looked through the tree line, took a report. I sat in my parents' room with my mom, wrapped in a blanket, still shaking. I remember not being able to stop shaking even after I felt like I should have calmed down. My body just kept shaking on its own. I slept in my parents' bed that night. For several nights after that. I wish I could tell you the story ended there. That it was a single terrible night, a random and inexplicable act by some unhinged stranger, and that life went back to normal afterward, and that was that. But it didn't end there. 3 weeks later, maybe a month, I'm not exact on the timing, but it wasn't long, I was at school. I went to Catholic school in Salem. We had a lunch recess that took place in the schoolyard, which was all concrete, enclosed, with a chain link fence along one side that faced the street. We were playing some game. I don't remember what it was, red light, green light, maybe, or some variation of tag. What I remember is that I had to run to the fence to be safe from whatever the threat of the game was. I reached the fence and grabbed the chain link, breathing hard from running, and a man on the other side of the fence said, "Hey." I turned. He was standing just on the other side of the chain link, hands at his sides, a grown man. He asked me for directions to somewhere, some street or building, I don't remember where, because the destination didn't matter the moment he said what came next. I said I didn't know, because we weren't supposed to talk to strangers through the fence. I started to turn away, and he said, "Your name's Chris, right?" I have tried, over the years, to explain to people what it felt like to hear those words. I have never quite managed it. It was like the whole schoolyard, the concrete, the voices of the other kids, the traffic sounds from the street. All of it went silent and distant, and there was just that man's voice. And my name, in my ears. My name, from a stranger at the school fence. I said no. I lied. I said my name was something else, or maybe I just said no and nothing else. I don't fully remember the words. I remember the feeling. He smiled, and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I ran. I ran straight to the nearest recess chaperone, one of the adult supervisors who stood out there during lunch, and I grabbed her arm and pointed back at the fence. But by the time she looked, the man was gone. He'd just gone. One of the kids who had been standing near me at the fence told the chaperone that yes, he'd seen the man too. The chaperone blew her whistle and called recess in, and the school called my parents, and I was taken home early. My parents were shaken in a way I hadn't seen before. Not panicked exactly, but deeply unsettled, the way adults look when something has crossed a line that they didn't know was there. We lived in a good neighborhood. We lived in Salem. These things weren't supposed to happen here, and they certainly weren't supposed to happen twice. The police were involved again. For months after that, my parents kept me under close watch. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. I wasn't left in the yard unsupervised. Life contracted in that way that it contracts when fear moves into a home and takes up residence. Eventually, slowly, gradually, things went back to normal, whatever normal meant. After that, I have never stopped thinking about the eye at the zipper. I'm an adult now, and I still think about it. Sometimes at night, if I'm somewhere unfamiliar, a hotel room, a rental, somewhere new, I'll find myself checking the locks without quite knowing why, and then I'll know why. I'll remember the way that zipper moved slowly downward, deliberate and careful, in the dark, and I'll think about the smile I couldn't see, but knew was there. I know I got lucky. I know, in the bone-deep way that you know certain things without wanting to think them through completely, that if my scream hadn't been loud enough, if my dad hadn't been a light sleeper, if any of a dozen small variables had been different, I might not be here to tell this story. And when I think about that, about the random and fragile chain of events that kept me safe that night, I also think about the other end of it. Whether that man ever found a night where everything went differently, whether there was a child somewhere who didn't scream in time, or whose scream wasn't heard. I grew up in Salem. It felt like a snow globe, safe and contained and sealed off from the things that happened in other places. But snow globes can be broken, and sometimes the darkness outside gets in. Story 2. The house on the cliff. There's a version of this story I used to tell at parties where I'd laugh it off at the end, where I'd say something like, "And I still never got the couch," and everyone would chuckle, and that would be that. I told it that way for about a year. Light. Punchline at the end. Because the alternative, sitting with what actually almost happened that evening on the Oregon coast, wasn't something I was ready to do in the middle of a crowded living room with a drink in my hand. I'm ready to tell it right now. I was 21 years old. I had just bought my first house, about 50 miles outside of Salem, far enough to feel like I'd made a clean break from the town I grew up in, close enough that I could still drive back to my parents' place for Sunday dinners. The house needed furnishing, and I was doing it the way most people in their early 20s furnish their first place. A mix of stuff from parents, stuff from their parents' friends, and a whole lot of scrolling through Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp and whatever else would let me find decent furniture for cheap. I was driving a Ford Raptor at the time, which made hauling big items easy. If you've ever tried to move a sectional couch in a sedan, you understand what a gift a truck bed is. The Raptor made me feel like I could take on any furniture listing, no matter the size or distance. I found the listing on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. I don't remember the exact day. What I remember is the photos. The seller had posted a kind of digital yard sale, a collection of items they were offloading all at once. Most of it was the usual stuff, lamps, side tables, some kind of shelving unit, but 2 items stopped my scroll dead. The first was a sectional couch in cream. Not off-white, not beige, cream. And it looked pristine. Not a mark on it, not a stain, not a thread out of place. The kind of couch that, if you found it at a furniture store, would run you $2,000 easy. The second item was a Cannondale mountain bike, which is a real brand, a good brand, not department store stuff. Where I'd moved, having a bike for exercise made a lot of sense. Miles of trails, long flat roads, good country for riding. I messaged the seller. He responded quickly. Short answers, no frills, not unfriendly, just direct. No small talk, no negotiating dance, just, here's the price, here's my availability. When I floated a slightly lower number for both items together, he agreed almost immediately. That should have given me a moment's pause. When someone caves on price that fast, it usually means one of 2 things. Either they genuinely just want the stuff gone, or the stuff isn't actually theirs to sell. I didn't pause. I was 21 and I wanted the couch. He said I could come that evening, that the days were long in Oregon in the summer and I'd still have plenty of light when I arrived. He sent me the address. I typed it into my Maps app, and when the satellite view loaded, I actually laughed out loud. The property was right on the coast. Not near the coast, on it. There was a long private driveway that veered off a coastal road through a stretch of trees. opening onto a massive clearing at the top of a hill. And the house, even from the satellite image, even in that slightly blurry overhead view, was enormous. Big roof, big footprint, big everything. And behind it, the backyard didn't end in a fence or a tree line. It ended in a cliff, a literal drop straight down to the Pacific Ocean. I zoomed in, I zoomed out. I looked at the listing price again. These people were selling a cream sectional and a Cannondale for what amounted to pocket change. And they were doing it from a cliffside mansion on the Oregon coast. Okay, rich people, I figured. Either purging old furniture they didn't care about anymore, or downsizing, or redecorating. People with that kind of money sometimes give things away for free just to avoid the hassle. The price made a certain kind of sense in that context. I got in the Raptor and headed west. The drive was nice, as drives along the Oregon coast almost always are. The land changes as you get closer to the water. The trees get older, the properties get bigger and farther apart. The air through the window smells different. I turned onto the last road before the driveway, a long stretch lined on both sides by thick stands of Douglas fir that blocked the light and turned the road dim even in the late afternoon. I passed a few private driveways cutting back into the trees, glimpsing long gravel lanes that probably led to other cliffside properties I'd never see. And then I found it. The turnoff was unmarked, just a gap in the tree line where the land had been cleared and a dirt track began, curving gently away from the road and into the trees. I turned in. About 10 seconds down the driveway, the trees gave way and the property opened up in front of me. The driveway continued on a slight uphill grade, rising toward the house at the top of the clearing. The grass on either side was cut clean and even. The clearing itself was huge, maybe 3 or 4 acres of open land before it reached the trees on the sides and the cliff on the far edge. And the house was exactly what the satellite image had promised. Big, expensive, the kind of house that looks like it was designed by an architect who was given a large budget and told to make something memorable. Slate gray siding, black trim, tall windows, a covered front porch that ran the full width of the facade. Parked next to the house was a car that did not belong there in any universe. A Mercury Sable, or something like it. One of those old, boxy American sedans from the early 2000s, the kind with the peeling clear coat and the slightly caved-in bumper and the general aura of having been driven very hard for a very long time. Parked right there next to this architect-designed coastal mansion, looking like it had wandered onto the wrong set. I noticed it. I noted it as strange. And then I moved on, because I was there for a couch, and none of this was necessarily weird enough to turn around over. I parked, got out, and walked up to the front porch. I was ready to ring the bell. There was a yellow Post-it note stuck to the front door. It read, "Doorbell broken. Please use back door." I stood there for a second. Okay, weird, because knocking was a perfectly functional option that didn't require a note. But fine. I pulled out my phone, sent a message on Messenger to the seller. "Hey, I'm here, going around back," and walked off the porch toward the side of the house. I noticed the windows as I walked along the side. Every single blind was closed. Every one. At 6 or 7 in the evening, on a summer day with good light, in a house with a view of the Pacific Ocean, every blind pulled completely shut. That struck me as odd. If I lived in a house like that, I'd have those windows open every waking hour. I'd never want to miss the view. I noted it. I kept walking. The backyard was everything the satellite image had suggested and more. A wide deck running along the back of the house, overlooking a long stretch of manicured grass that fell away toward the cliff edge and beyond a cliff. The Pacific Ocean catching the last long light of the summer evening, going out toward the horizon in every shade of blue and gold. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen in my life. I walked up onto the deck and knocked on the sliding glass door. The door had one of those interior sliding blinds pulled all the way across it, blocking any view inside. I waited. I knocked again. I checked my phone. No response to my message. Not read, not replied to, nothing. I figured the guy was maybe in the shower or in a room at the front of the house where he couldn't hear the knock. I decided if I was going to wait anyway, I might as well take in the view. I walked back off the deck and down the grass toward the cliff edge, hands in my pockets, watching the sun getting lower over the water. I took a picture. I thought about what it would mean to be able to afford a place like this someday. I stood there for a few minutes in the way you stand somewhere beautiful when you don't have anything else to do. And then I turned around to walk back to the house. Every single blind on the back of the house was open. I stopped walking. A second ago, 2 minutes ago at most, every blind had been closed. I just walked past all of these windows. I'd noted them, and now they were all up, every one of them, and the interior of the house was visible from here, lit in the warm late-day light coming through the front windows on the other side. And there was a person standing at each window. I counted later when I was trying to reconstruct everything. There were at least 6 windows visible from the backyard, and at each one, at every single one, there was a person standing perfectly still, facing outward. Facing me. I took a few steps toward the house, squinting. I told myself it could be a trick of the light. I told myself it could be furniture or mannequins or reflections. I told myself there was a rational explanation. I got close enough to see their faces. Every single one of them was smiling. Not a polite smile, not a neutral expression. A wide, full smile, the kind that shows teeth, and they were all identical in some uncanny way. The same expression on every face, like they'd all been given the same instruction before I turned around. And they were absolutely motionless, completely still, every one of them, standing at their window, smiling, watching me walk toward the house. I stopped moving. I think there's a part of the brain that operates faster than conscious thought, a part that processes danger at a speed that bypasses logic and analysis. That part of my brain had already made its decision. I just needed a second. To catch up, I turned and walked at a fast pace around the side of the house. The side window that had been shuttered when I first passed, it was now open too. Someone standing there as well, visible from the corner of my eye. I did not stop. I did not look directly at them. I kept walking. I got to the front of the house, got in the Raptor, and reversed. I did not look at the front windows until I had already committed to leaving. Some part of me needed to know, needed one more piece of information before I drove away. I glanced up at the house in my rearview mirror. The front door was open. A man was standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, watching me reverse down the driveway. Just standing there, calm, patient, watching me leave. I reversed all the way to the road and didn't stop. I drove maybe a quarter mile before I thought clearly enough to pull into a driveway. The nearest neighbor, I'll call him Tom, answered the door. I explained what had happened, what I'd seen, everything from the Facebook listing to the people at the windows to the man on the porch. Tom's face went through a series of expressions. He knew the property. He knew the owner. He called him Jim. They were friends. He said Jim was almost never home, that he traveled constantly for work, that he definitely would not have set up some kind of prank. Tom called Jim on the spot. I stood there and listened. "Hey Jim, it's Tom next door. Listen, I've got someone at my door right now saying you invited him to your house to pick up furniture, but there were people at all the windows, and a man on the front porch." There was a pause on the other end, and then Jim said, "What are you talking about?" Tom handed me the phone. I told Jim everything. The Facebook listing, the messenger exchange, the post-it note, the mercury sable, the people at the windows, all of it. Jim said, "I'm not home this week. I haven't been home in 4 days." He asked me to describe the car. I described it. He asked me to describe the man on the porch as best as I could. I did. He sounded genuinely alarmed. Not panicked, but the kind of controlled alarm that people use when they're trying to stay calm because panicking won't help anything. He asked me to stay available. He was going to call the police. I drove home. I'll be honest, I didn't have it in me to sit around for a 2-hour police investigation. I'd given Tom and Jim everything I knew. I'd done what I could. I went home and I sat with what I'd seen. Jim called me that night. He'd spoken to the police who had gone to the property. He asked me to send him the Facebook listing, but when I went to find it, the listing was gone. The entire post deleted. I sent him the details of the messenger profile I'd been communicating with, but by the time I looked, that was gone too. Blank profile, no history, no identifying information, like it had never existed. The police had found the house unlocked. All 3 exterior doors had been left open. The mercury sable was gone. The blinds were all closed again. And as far as Jim could tell, at that time, at least, nothing appeared to have been stolen. I've thought about this a lot over the years. I've turned it over from every angle, trying to understand the purpose of it. What did they want? They'd clearly gone to significant lengths to get me there. A convincing listing, a real address, a believable messenger exchange. They'd wanted me in that backyard specifically. They'd waited until I was at the far edge of the property with my back to the house before revealing themselves. The whole staging of it, the note on the front door, the closed blinds, the back door, had been designed to move me in a specific direction, toward the cliffside of the property. And when I turned around, they wanted me to see them all at once. They wanted the effect of it, the smiling faces at every window. And then someone came to stand on the porch, hands in pockets, watching me leave. I don't know if they wanted to scare me, or take me, or something else entirely. I don't know if the whole operation was about me specifically, or if I was simply the first person to answer the listing and show up. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't turned around when I did, or if I'd been less willing to trust my instincts when they were screaming at me. I just know that the moment my brain registered those smiling faces, all of them perfectly still, staring out at me, something older and smarter than logic took over and told me to leave. I'm glad I listened. I still don't have a couch. Story 3, the man in the pool. I want to start by telling you about the cough, because if you take the pool and the locked door and the wet footprints on the stairs, all of that is terrifying on its own, don't get me wrong. But the cough is the part that lives in my head. The cough is the part that tells me this wasn't random. This wasn't some drunk guy who wandered onto the wrong property. Someone was in those woods behind my house for hours before anything happened. Someone stood just inside the tree line in the middle of the afternoon and watched me set up folding tables, and then waited. That's the part one can't let go of. Let me back up. I live in Murraysville, Pennsylvania. If you're not from Western Pennsylvania, Murraysville is one of those mid-sized suburban towns east of Pittsburgh. Good schools, quiet streets, the kind of place where people leave their garage doors open during the day and think nothing of it. My parents have lived in the same house there for decades. I was living with them at the time of this story, in my early 20s, still getting my footing before I found my own place. The house is nice. More than nice, really. My parents did well, and the property reflects that. There's a pool in the backyard, an in-ground with a pool house beside it, and string lights along the patio that my mom put up years ago and never took down because they look good and there's no reason to. The backyard is private in the best possible way. The sides of the yard are lined with hedges and a wood fence, and the back of the property, behind the pool house, opens into woods. Not a few trees. Real woods. Dense, old-growth Pennsylvania woods that go back at least half a mile before they hit another property line. There are no trails back there. No reason for anyone to be in them. Just trees and underbrush, and, in the summer, the kind of thick green canopy that makes the woods look almost impenetrable from the outside. My parents were going away for the weekend. I had the house to myself. I did what any 20-something does when they have their parents' house to themselves for a weekend. I planned a party. Nothing crazy, just a backyard pool party on a Saturday night. Maybe 20 people, music and string lights and beer pong tables, and the pool. The kind of party that's fun to plan and easy to execute when the venue is already perfect for it. I started setting up in the early afternoon. It was a little overcast, which didn't matter for a night party, and the temperature was good, warm enough to swim, but not so hot that being outside felt like a punishment. I was hauling folding tables out from the pool house, setting them up on the patio, arranging chairs. I had music going from a Bluetooth speaker. It was one of those low-stakes, pleasant early party setups where everything is going smoothly and you're in a good mood. I was carrying a folding table across the patio, about 20 feet from the tree line behind the pool house, when I heard it. A cough, not a startled sound. Not the sharp, involuntary kind of cough someone makes when they inhale something wrong. This was slow and deliberate, a deep, rolling throat clear, the kind of sound a man makes when he's trying to move something stubborn out of the back of his throat. The sound carried clearly across the yard. The wind was almost completely still, which meant there was nothing to muffle it or distort it. It came from just inside the tree line, not deep in the woods, not 50 yards back in the underbrush, just inside the trees, maybe 20, 30 feet past where the grass ended and the forest began, close enough to see the patio clearly, close enough to watch me. I stopped moving. I stood there with the table still in my hands, listening. Nothing, no follow-up sound, no footsteps shifting in the leaves, no crunch of a branch underfoot, no sound of someone moving away, just silence, which was wrong. If it was a hiker who'd gotten turned around, if it was someone just passing through, they would have kept moving. They would have made some kind of noise. People in motion make noise. But whoever had coughed was now completely still, which meant they were standing in the trees on purpose. Staying quiet on purpose. I set the table down and looked toward the tree line. I called out, "Who's there?" Nothing. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, staring at the edge of the woods. The undergrowth was dense enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet in. Anyone standing just behind the first line of trees would be invisible to me. I would not be invisible to them. That feeling, the one where you know you're being watched, where the back of your neck registers something before your brain can name it, settled over me like a change in temperature. I picked up the remaining setup materials, brought them back inside, and called my friend Mark. I asked him to come over early. I didn't tell him about the cough. I didn't want to set a weird tone before the party even started. I just said I could use an extra hand getting things ready. Mark showed up around 6. We finished the setup together, and the whole time we were outside, I kept glancing at the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound. If someone had been standing there earlier, they were gone now. Or they were very, very still. Guests started arriving around 7. By 8 o'clock, the backyard was full. Music going, people in the pool, beer pong tables occupied, the string lights reflecting off the water. 20 people in a backyard has a way of making everything feel normal and safe. The woods at the back of the property didn't feel threatening anymore. They were just trees. Background. A couple of times during the night, I caught myself looking at the tree line anyway. I don't know why. The cough just hadn't fully left me. The party wound down around midnight. By 1 in the morning, the last guests had said their goodbyes and headed home. I walked a slow circuit of the backyard, around the pool, behind the pool house, one last look at the woods, and everything was still and quiet. The pool water had settled. The lights reflected off the surface. I was tired, and I was satisfied, and everything was fine. I went inside. I locked the sliding back door. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, got into bed, and was asleep, or close to it, within the hour. At 2 in the morning, I heard a splash. Not small, not a bird landing, not a leaf hitting the surface, not some ambient night sound that could be explained away. This was the full, heavy, unmistakable sound of a person jumping into the deep end of a pool. A displaced water sound. A person-sized splash. My eyes opened. I lay there for a few seconds, listening, and then I heard it, strokes. Someone swimming. The rhythmic pull and push of arms through water. The sound of it muffled slightly by the walls in the distance, but absolutely unmistakable. Someone was swimming laps in my parents' pool at 2 in the morning. My first thought was that one of the party guests had stayed behind without my noticing, crashed somewhere in the backyard, maybe, and woken up in the heat and decided to go for a swim. It was the most charitable explanation I could construct, but I knew everyone who had come that night. I knew all 20 of them. None of them would do something like that. Not without texting, not without asking, not at 2 in the morning after everyone else had gone home. I got out of bed without turning on my bedroom light. I didn't want to be seen before I could see. I moved to the window that overlooks the backyard and looked down at the pool. There was a man swimming. He was doing slow laps, back and forth, completely unhurried. The pool lights were still on from the party. I'd left them running, and the underwater light illuminated the water and, just barely, his face as he moved through it. I leaned closer to the glass and studied him. I did not recognize him. I know every face that walked into that backyard that night. I've known most of those people for years. This man was not one of them. I had never seen him before in my life. I opened the window and called out, "Hey, who is that?" The swimming stopped immediately, like someone had hit a switch. The water kept moving, sloshing gently from the disrupted momentum, but the strokes stopped and the man went still. He turned his face upward toward my window. Very slowly. Even at that distance, in that light, I noticed something. He wasn't startled. He didn't flinch, didn't scramble, didn't do any of the things a person does when they've been caught somewhere they shouldn't be. He just looked up at me, calm, like he'd been expecting this conversation. He started moving toward the shallow end. He climbed out of the pool, and the first thing I registered was how tall he was. Well over 6 feet. He stood on the pool deck for a moment, dripping, looking toward the house. Not at me specifically, at the house, like he was orienting himself. I called out again, "Hey, what are you doing? Who are you?" He didn't answer. He didn't look back up at my window. He turned toward the back of the house and started walking. Not jogging, not running, walking. Direct and purposeful, the way someone walks when they know exactly where they're going. Arms at his sides, moving at a fast, steady pace toward the sliding glass door. I moved away from the window. My heart was hitting my ribs now in a way that made it hard to think. I tried to tell myself he was going to knock, going to identify himself, going to explain. I tried to hold on to the idea that this had a reasonable explanation. Then I heard the sliding door open. I locked it. I had locked it. I know I did. I remember the specific sound of it, the click of the latch, the little flip of the security bar. I lock that door every night. It's automatic. It's habit. It's not something I leave to chance. But I heard it slide open, the familiar rolling sound of the track, and then I heard it slide shut behind him. He was inside. I moved to my bedroom door and turned the lock. My hands were shaking. I could actually see my hands shaking when I held them up to check the lock, and that was somehow more frightening than anything else. The physical evidence of what my body knew that my brain was still trying to argue with. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark, "Did you notice anyone still in the backyard when you left?" And then, without waiting for an answer, I called 911. I whispered my address, whispered that there was an intruder in the house, gave the dispatcher everything I could manage in as few words as possible. And then I heard the footsteps, wet footsteps on the hardwood floor downstairs, slow, steady, with that particular sound wet bare feet make on a hard surface, the slight tacky pull with each step, the small slap of a sole lifting off wood. He wasn't hurrying. He wasn't searching, opening doors and checking rooms. He was walking directly and deliberately, like he already knew the layout of the house. He knew where the stairs were. I heard him start climbing, one step at a time. Each stair in my parents' house has its own particular creak, and I know all of them the way you know the sounds of a place you've lived in for years. I heard each one in sequence as he came up, slow and steady, one after another. He reached the top of the stairs. I heard his footsteps on the hallway floor, moving toward my room, and then they stopped. He was right outside my door. I could hear water dripping onto the hardwood in the hallway. Slow, steady drops. He was still dripping wet from the pool, standing outside my locked bedroom door in the dark hallway. And I could hear his water on the floor. The door handle moved once, then again, then a third time, harder, like he was confirming what he already suspected, that it was locked, that I'd locked it, that it wasn't going to open. Then silence. A long silence. Long enough that I started to wonder whether he'd moved away and I hadn't heard it, and then he knocked. 3 knocks. Slow and measured, spaced evenly apart. Not frantic, not aggressive, the kind of knock someone gives a door when they expect it to be opened. I put the 911 call on speaker and forced my voice to be as steady and as loud as I could make it. I said, "I'm on the phone with the police right now. They're on their way." Silence. 5 seconds, maybe more. And then a voice from the other side of the door, low, calm, completely controlled, the voice of a man in his 30s who did not sound frightened or confused or caught, said, "It's me. Open the door. Engusei, Samaikia, Kansei." It's me. Not his name. Not an explanation. Not any information that would help me understand who was standing in the hallway. Just, "It's me. Open the door," as though I should know, as though the two of us shared some prior understanding that I had apparently forgotten. I said, "I don't know you. Leave. Now." 5 more seconds of silence, and then he walked away. I tracked every sound, the footsteps retreating down the hall, fast now, moving with a different kind of urgency than before. Down the stairs, each creak in reverse order, across the hardwood downstairs, and then the front door, not the back, the front, opening and slamming shut. I did not move until the police were inside the house with me. When I finally came downstairs, there was a trail of water on the floor, From the back sliding door to the foot of the stairs, up every step, down the hallway, to my bedroom door. A clear, unbroken trail, already starting to dry at the edges, but still visible. The physical record of everywhere he'd been. The police searched the entire house. They searched the backyard. They found nothing and no one. Just the water trail and the unlocked back door. I texted everyone from the party. Every single person. The ones still awake answered that night. The rest answered in the morning. Nobody had stayed behind. Nobody had seen anyone linger. He was a complete stranger to every single person who had been at that party. I've thought about the sliding door a lot. I know I locked it. My best theory, the one that makes the most logistical sense, is that he came inside during the party itself. People were going in and out all night, using the bathroom, grabbing things from the kitchen. A sliding door in a busy backyard party is opened and closed dozens of times over the course of an evening. If he slipped inside during one of those moments, he could have quietly released the lock from the inside and then slipped back out, leaving the door unlocked for later. He would have had hours. He could have learned the layout of the house. He could have found the stairs, found the hallway, found my room, and I think about the cough. The timing of it, early afternoon, hours before anyone arrived, standing in the tree line watching me set up alone, suggests that this was not impulsive. He didn't stumble past the house and see the party and decide on a whim to go for a swim. He was there before the party. He was watching before the party. He waited through the entire party, through 20 people and music and light, and then he waited through the hour after the party ended and at 2 in the morning when the house was dark and quiet and I was alone. He jumped in the pool. He wanted me to hear the splash. He wanted me to look out the window. He wanted me to see him standing there, to watch him walk toward the house, to know he was coming in. Why? I don't know. I've turned that question over for years, and I still don't have an answer that satisfies me. I just know what happened when he reached my door and found it locked. He knocked, and he spoke, and when his words didn't open the door, he left. And I know what it means that he left when he did. It means the locked door mattered. It means that the one thing I did right that night, stumbling to my bedroom door in the dark with shaking hands and turning that lock, was the thing that changed how the night ended. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what would have happened if I'd opened the door. I'm glad the door was there. I'm glad I locked it. I'm glad I didn't open it.